So we define data management with our product portfolio under the ArcServe brand, which provides a comprehensive solution to protect your data from backing up to tape through to disk-based backup, so speeding up the ability or the time to recover your data, right the way through to high availability using our replication technology for failover in the event of a disaster. There's a variety of storage media being deployed in data centers, and fundamentally it's about cost and speed. So cost of the storage media, obviously the faster the media, whether you go from tape through to disk through to solid state disk, there's a different cost, but there's also a different benefit from each of those, and that's the speed of that disk and how fast it is to get data back. So as you look at a data protection solution that's protecting data, you now have to think about which data am I going to store where, for what purpose. So critical data to be able to do very fast recovery will usually be on disk, but then you have different types of disk and different speeds of disk that have a different cost. So primary storage or secondary storage you would deploy in your environment, and obviously then with tape at the back end. So there's additional complexity, but it clearly brings significant advantage to organizations around how they protect their data. Well, virtualization is sweeping the world, with some parts of the world fully virtualized, and obviously different evolutions of that in different places. And virtualization brings clear advantages around efficiently using hardware that is in the data center, but it also brings complexity. And when you think about data protection, it's evolved from protecting one server that might be running one application right the way through to now servers might be running 4 or 5 virtual servers or maybe more. And how do you protect that, and how does your solution work in that environment? Does it support and can it understand what the virtualization software is doing and where it's storing data? So, for example, as you look at the ArcServe product portfolio, we've worked very hard to be fully integrated into all of the APIs from VMware, for example, or from Microsoft's Hyper-V or Xen, to ensure that the ArcServe products understand by talking to the virtualization software, whether that's vSphere, for example, with VMware, to understand where it's storing data and how we need to drive the backup. So being fully integrated and fully compatible is critical now. There is, and the difference comes in a number of different aspects. So primarily deciding where you're going to store data comes back to the question of speed of recovery, your bandwidth if you're thinking about the cloud, so how quickly are you able to push data into the cloud. There's obviously the security question that is on everyone's minds about where they're storing what data, and so that impacts choice around where data is stored. And then, of course, what technology you're going to use. And so it's critical to find a solution that can work in all of those environments. A hybrid data protection strategy these days is becoming more and more the norm, where certain data is protected locally. And, for example, we see our customers using our disk snapshot technology to keep local snapshots, which in the event of an emergency can do a very fast recovery, but perhaps using things like private clouds to store their data in a more traditional way, or even public clouds, which we're seeing more and more being used for high availability and failover in the event of a disaster. It's a very interesting question, and as you look at the shift that's happening in the market, there is a move for companies to look more and more to outsource the backup and data protection process, and we're seeing a growing trend of managed service providers. And I think, in fact, if you look at most reports from the experts in the managed service provider world, data protection service is probably the number one or number two service that managed service providers are looking to offer. And the most important thing is to understand what service you're buying from those service providers, how they're backing up your data, because ultimately they also need to protect your data that they're backing up, and you need to understand what they're using to do that. Well, in a number of ways. So as data is growing dramatically, and the numbers vary depending on who you talk to, at what percentage data is growing, but let's assume it's growing at 50% year on year, which is probably a good average number of all of the market estimates. As data grows, if the efficiency comes by taking data that you no longer need off the systems, and that obviously reduces the backup window. The backup window continues to be a big problem. So, there are many instances where we see challenges where customers are unable to do a full backup within 24 hours because of the size of data. So having an archiving strategy is very important. Actually, then if you tie that in and look at the cloud cost model is a cumulative, ongoing monthly cost. And so whereas you might be looking at, a decision might be made, I'll just buy a new disk and plug it into my wherever you're keeping your storage and add more data. In a managed service provider model or in a cloud model, you're paying per gigabyte, per terabyte, whatever that might be. And so understanding what you really need to back up and having a solid archiving strategy is actually very important in terms of cost and time it takes to push the data to wherever you're storing. Yeah, I think there's a number of advantages. So first of all, having a data protection solution that delivers against what we call RTO and RPO, recovery time objectives, which is how quickly do you want to get your data back, and recovery point objectives, RPO, which is to what point you want to be able to recover to, so 15 minutes before the disaster, an hour, a day. Having a solution that can address differing needs of RPO, RTO is very important. And as you look at the ArcServe solution with our tape backup, our disk-based backup, and our replication and high availability, you get that from one vendor, from one product solution set. And that's important because they're integrated, they can work together, they can talk to each other, and makes it easier to manage. And then management costs of your data protection should not be overlooked either. So finding ways to keep costs as low as possible is also critical. And then when you dive a level further and you start looking at what technologies are within those solution sets, we felt it was very important that deduplication was a core part of the backup process. And so therefore we decided to build our deduplication as an integral part of the solution rather than an add-on. There are some cases where it makes sense to have an external deduplication device, and in those cases we actually have a number of vendors that we partner with. But fundamentally having deduplication as core to the central backup process makes the most sense.